live feed. I'm Rashad Mitchell, coming to you live on my YouTube channel, Rashad Mitchell. Um, yeah, I'm going to be talking about this book, man. I'm a self-published author, and one of the books that I self-published several years back was a book called The Top 50 Underrated Wide Receivers. The Top 50 Underrated NFL Wide Receivers. I self-published this, The Top 50 Underrated NFL Wide Receivers. Get into the countdown and go over the whole book. And at number 50, I had Amani Toomer. Amani Toomer was a solid, good wide receiver for his entire career as a New York Giant from 1996 to 2008. Amani Toomer is at the time, was the current record holder of the Giants club records with 9,497 receiving yards at the time. He's arguably the best wide receiver to ever play for the Giants. In 2007, in that playoff run that the Giants had to the Super Bowl, when they beat the Patriots, beat Tampa Bay, they beat the Cowboys, the Green Bay Packers, and the Patriots. Yeah, Tampa Bay, Dallas, Green Bay, and Patriots. And New England, that's the team that went undefeated. Amani Toomer played the wide receiver position at the highest level. He caught 21 passes for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. In the divisional playoff game against Dallas, Toomer scored a 52-yard touchdown catch and ran along with another touchdown that resulted in 6 catches and 84 yards receiving. Amani Toomer was a playmaker that was instrumental in the Giants winning the Super Bowl in 2007. So he's arguably one of the best wide receivers to never play in the Pro Bowl. So I had to put Amani Toomer at number 50. Number 49, Eric Mose. Eric Mose was part of the 1996 draft class, just like Amani Toomer. Let's call that draft class. 96 had a great draft class. Terrell Owens, Keyshawn Johnson was part of that draft class. Big time receivers. But Eric Mose is very underrated. He played 10 years as a Buffalo Bill from 1996 to 2005. His breakout season was in 1998 when he set a single record for the regular season for most receiving yards by a Buffalo Bill receiver with 1,368 yards receiving. Now, Eric Mose averaged 20.4 yards per catch, which was second in the NFL. In his 8th season as a number 1 receiver, Mose caught 648 passes for 8,523 receiving yards. This production was the 7th most in the NFL during that span. In 2002, Mose was the first Bill receiver at the time to catch 100 passes. He made an impact in the NFL playoffs when he had an NFL record of 240 receiving yards against the Miami Dolphins. A 3-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro, Eric Mose was one of the premier receivers during the late 90s and early 2000s. Eric Mose caught 764 receptions and 9,995 receiving yards and 49 touchdowns. At number 48, Alvin Harper. Alvin Harper should have been a great wide receiver in the NFL, but that doesn't diminish the impact that he had as a Dallas Cowboy during the early to mid-90s. Alongside Michael Irvin, this was a first-class dynamic duo of receivers or defensive backs had trouble covering. Alvin Harper was a nightmare matchup whenever he faced the 49ers in the NFC Championship game in 1992 and 1993. Because the 1992 NFC Championship game, Alvin Harper made 2 spectacular pass catches that stood out, like when quarterback Troy Aikman pump fake and threw a long deep pass down the right sideline, but the ball was sort of underthrown, but Alvin Harper was able to leap over defensive back Eric Davis for the catch, which was one of the greatest catches in NFL history. Also, the catch was a 38-yard catch, but with the score 24-20 in the fourth quarter with 4:22 left. On 1st and 10, Troy Aikman went back to pass and threw a quick slant to Harper and caught a 14-yard pass, but went 70 yards heading into the 49 territory. It set up Aikman to receiver Kevin Martin for a 6-yard touchdown to seal the game. Now, whoever's liked the button, press the like button on this video, this live feed. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Whenever you like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. So in 1993 NFC Championship game, Alvin Harper made an impact again when backup quarterback Bernie Kosar threw a 42-yard touchdown pass to Harper to seal the game at 35-14. Or somebody unliked the video. That's all right. That's all right. Alvin Harper was a go-to player in the clutch, just as Michael Irvin, but only for a short period of time. A 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys, Alvin Harper was one of the best deep threats in the NFL, but what stood out was his yards per catch, whether it was 21.6 yards or in 1994, 24.9. So Alvin Harper was a guy that was fast, had a lot of speed, but he didn't do it for a long period of time. He didn't sustain it. Now he's better, more talented player than Mike Irvin. Mike Irvin was great the way he did, but when you look at Harper, he should have been much more greater. It just didn't happen. But I had to put Alvin Harper on the list. Number 47 had Keenan McCardle. He was an excellent wide receiver, especially as a member of Jacksonville Jaguars. His forte was having the ability to run routes across the middle of the field. Keenan earned a nickname Thunder because of this. In 1996, McCardle had a Pro Bowl season by catching 85 passes for 1,129 yards, receiving, including 3 touchdowns. During his 6-year career with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Keenan McCardle had 499 receptions for 6,393 yards and 30 touchdowns. A 2-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Keenan caught 883 passes for 11,373 yards receiving and 63 touchdowns. Next, we got Al Toon at number 46. During the 1988 season, the New York Jets faced the New York Giants with the scenario of if the Giants win and they clinch a playoff berth, but it wasn't the case because with the score 21-20, the Giants had the lead, but quarterback Ken O'Brien threw a 5-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Al Toon to preserve a 27-21 victory, knocking the Giants out. The Giants out of the playoffs. Al Toon was an exceptional wide receiver for the New York Jets from 1985 to 1992. He had a history of concussions, but was a productive receiver anyway. A 3-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro receiver, including AFC Player of the Year in 1986. In 1988, his best season was when he led the league in receptions with 93. Overall, Al Toon caught 517 passes. For 6,605 receiving yards. 31 touchdowns. Number 45, I got Ed McCaffrey. Ed McCaffrey wasn't your prototypical wide receiver for one. He was a white wide receiver, but he had a quickness to get by defensive backs, a 3-time Super Bowl champion, a 1-time All-Pro and Pro Bowler. Okay, Anderson says, OMG, I'm your biggest fan, Rashad. Thank you so much. You subscribe to the channel? No, thank you. McCaffrey played on 3 teams, the New York Giants, the 49ers, the Broncos from 1991 to 2003. But in 2000, McCaffrey set a Bronco record with receptions, 101 receptions. Overall, Ed McCaffrey caught 565 passes for 7,422 receiving yards, including 55 touchdowns. Yeah, thank you, Addison. Thank you. Like I said, you subscribe to the channel. Appreciate it. Thank you. At number 44, Roy Green. Roy Green started his career as a rookie returning kicks, including a 106-yard return for a touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys, tying a record in 1979. 4th-round pick out of Henderson State. Roy Green made his mark leading the St. Louis Cardinals in receiving in 1983, 1984, and 1988. He was even on the All-Madden team because he was the best player, not the best receiver in the game. Overall, Roy Green caught 559 passes for 8,965 receiving yards, including 6 touchdowns. At number 43, said, yeah, Addison, yeah, I subscribe. I love watching you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Appreciate it, Addison. All right, number 43, I got Ricky Sanders. Ricky Sanders was 1/3 of the posse. There was a triumvirate of receivers that included Gary Clark and Art Monk. As a Redskin, he made his mark as a deep threat in 1986, averaging 20.4 yards per catch. But his claim to fame was in Super Bowl 22, when Sanders was dominant as a receiver by catching 9 passes for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. At the time of the Super Bowl, Sanders had set records for receiving yards, total yards, most touchdowns in 1 quarter, most receiving yards in 1 quarter, and a tie for longest touchdown reception, which was 80 yards. His best season was in 1988, when he was fifth in the NFL in receiving yards with 1,148 and 12 touchdowns. Number 42, I got Marques Colston. Marques Colston, at the time, I don't know if he's still the case, but he was the all-time leader in Saints history in receiving yards, yards from scrimmage, receiving touchdowns, total touchdowns, total reception. I believe he still has those records intact. Because I wrote this book years ago. So, I don't know, I guess he's still the all-time leader in these categories: receiving yards, yards from scrimmage, receiving touchdowns, and total receptions. A 7th-round pick from Hofstra, Colston has become a fixture. He was a fixture as a good side receiver in the NFL without that much fanfare. He may be the best receiver never to play in the Pro Bowl. His best season was in 2007 when he caught 98 passes for 1,202 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Overall, Colston had caught 711 passes for 9,759 receiving yards, including 72 touchdowns. Number 41, I had Gary Clark. Another receiver from the famed posse triumvirate of wide receivers was Gary Clark of the Washington Redskins. He played 8 seasons for the Redskins where his success was significant. A 4-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro receiver. In 1985, Clark had a great rookie season, catching 72 passes for 926 yards and 5 touchdowns. Clark became one of the league's best receivers. He was a fan favorite of John Madden because of his toughness, big playability, and his willingness to block made him a fixture on the All-Madden team. A 2-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champion, Clark was part of NFL history when in 1989, he, along with Monk and Sanders, had over 1,000 seasons apiece, 1,000 receiving yards for seasons apiece. So in Super Bowl 26, Gary Clark caught 7 passes for 114 yards and a touchdown. Gary Clark became the first wide receiver in NFL history to at least catch 50 passes in his first 10 NFL seasons. Overall, Clark caught 699 passes for 10,856 receiving yards, including 65 touchdowns. Herman Moore, I had him at number 40. Before Calvin Johnson of the Detroit Lions, there was Herman Moore because of his size, a 4-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro receiver. From 1995 to 1997, Herman Moore had 100-plus catches, especially his best season in 1995, when he caught 123 passes for 1,686 passing yards and 14 touchdowns. Overall, Moore holds NFL records for both receptions, with 61 receiving yards with 965 yards on Thursday games, 670 receptions for 9,174 receiving yards and 62 touchdowns. Number 39, Harold Carmichael. Harold Carmichael, he's the tallest wide receiver to ever play football. Pro football. Harold Carmichael made his mark as a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, a 4-time Pro Bowler who led the league in receptions and receiving yards in 1983. He finished in third in 1978 with 1,072 and was second in receiving touchdowns in 1979 with 11. Carmichael was consistent in terms of catching the ball because he caught passes in 127 consecutive games in 1980, which was an NFL record. He made the All-Decade team for the 1970s. Overall, Carmichael caught 498 receptions for 8,985 yards with 79 career touchdowns, including 18th all-time in career touchdown receptions. Next, at number 38, I have Rod Smith. He may be the best wide receiver to play for the Denver Broncos. Rod Smith was a prolific wide receiver during his tenure as a Denver Bronco, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, a 2-time All-Pro, including 3-time Pro Bowler. Smith is the all-time career leader in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He was undrafted, signed as a free agent with the Denver Broncos. Rod Smith's first ever catch was a game-winning catch against the Washington Redskins during the 1995 season, which was a 43-yard touchdown. During his 14 seasons, Rod Smith had 8 seasons of at least 1,000 yards receiving. In Super Bowl 33, Smith caught 5 passes for 152 yards, including an 80-yard touchdown. Overall, Rod Smith has Hall of Fame credentials as a wide receiver. When you look at his career, only undrafted player to reach 10,000 receiving yards. Also, Smith has the receiving yards and touchdowns receptions by any undrafted player in NFL history. Also, Rod Smith is the only the sixth player in NFL history to have 100 receptions against at least 3 teams: Kansas City Chiefs, San Diego Chargers, and Oakland Raiders. Now they Las Vegas Raiders. 849 receptions, 11,389 receiving yards. Also, 68 touchdowns. So definitely underrated wide receiver Rod Smith. At number 37, Charlie Joyner. The great coach Bill Walsh, who coached the San Francisco 49ers to 3 Super Bowls, once said that Charlie Joyner was the most intelligent, the smartest, the most calculated receiver the game has ever known. He retired with the most career receptions, receiving yards, games played out of any wide receiver in NFL history. A Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee in 1996, Charlie Joyner was a force as a San Diego Charger as well as a 3-time Pro Bowler, and exceeding 4 times 1,000 yards. The 1980 AFC Championship game, Joyner caught 6 passes for 130 yards for 2 touchdowns. In 1982, Charlie Joyner caught 7 passes for 108 yards in the epic in Miami between the Dolphins and Chargers, including a 29-yard reception on the penultimate play of the game, set up the winning field goal. Overall, Charlie Joyner caught 750 passes for 12,146 receiving yards, including 65 touchdowns. At number 36, Lionel Taylor. He was the first player as a receiver to ever catch 100 passes in one season and 14 games during the 1961 season. A 4-time AFL All-Star, and he made his mark as a Denver Bronco, where he was the third all-time receptions, 543 receiving yards, 6,872. A team MVP for the Denver Broncos 3 times. Lionel Taylor overall caught 567 passes for 7,195 receiving yards, including 45 touchdowns. At number 35, I had Jake Reed. Jake Reed was a third-round pick of the 1991 NFL Draft for the Minnesota Vikings, which was a pick that the Vikings acquired in the Herschel Walker trade. Now, Jake Reed was a receiver that was under the radar due to playing alongside Randy Moss and Chris Carter. Jake Reed had 4 1,000-yard seasons, including a career high of 85 receptions in 1994. He was second in receiving yards in the NFL with 1,320 yards only in the 1996 season. But in the history of the Minnesota Vikings, Jake Reed would also make 12 plays of 50-plus yards with Minnesota Vikings, second in team history at the time. I don't know if that's still the record, but the accomplishment still stands. Second. But anyway, overall 450 receptions for receiving yards of 6,999 and 36 touchdowns. Drew Pearson. Drew Pearson is universally known for the Hail Mary play that took place in the 1975 NFL playoff game between the Vikings and the Cowboys. Quarterback Roger Staubach threw a 50-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Drew Pearson, which is known as the Hail Mary play. For 11 seasons for the Dallas Cowboys, Drew Pearson was Michael Irvin before Michael Irvin in terms of arguably being the first great wide receiver for the Cowboys. He was known as Mr. Clutch due to the clutch catches in the game-winning situations, including a game-sealing touchdown in the 1973 playoff game against the Los Angeles Rams, or the game-winning pass from reserve quarterback Clint Longley in the 1974 Thanksgiving game against the Washington Redskins. But Pearson has been included among the top 75 plays in NFL films in 1994. Not only that, in the 1980 divisional playoff game against the Atlanta Falcons, Drew Pearson made clutch catches, including in the NFC Championship game between the 49ers and the Cowboys, when he made a great catch across the middle. But if it wasn't for a horse collar tackle by cornerback Eric Wright, Pearson would have scored. A 3-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time first-team All-Pro, as well as a Super Bowl champion in 1977. Drew Pearson was on an all-decade team for the 1970s. He accomplished a whole lot as an undrafted player. When you look at 489 receptions for 7,822 receiving yards, including 48 touchdowns. Right, next I got number 33, I got Dwight Clark. Dwight Clark was known for the catch against the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC Championship game on January 10th, 1982. The catch resulted in a touchdown, leaping over Everson Walls, but Clark was exceptional by catching 8 passes for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Overall, for 8 seasons, Clark made his mark as a San Francisco 49er, being a 2-time Pro Bowler and 2-time Super Bowl champion, including a 2-time All-Pro selection. Dwight Clark was one of the elite receivers during the 1980s, but was underrated when you look at 406 receptions for 6,750 receiving yards, including 48 receiving touchdowns. Number 32, James Lofton was very underrated as a wide receiver during the 1980s. As a Green Bay Packer for most of his career, Lofton was an all-8-time Pro Bowler, an all-decade team for the 80s, a Pro Football Hall of Famer inductee in 2003. As a Buffalo Bill, Lofton appeared in 3 Super Bowls. In more than 5 seasons, Lofton averaged 20 yards per catch, leading the league in 1983 and 1984 with an average of 22.4 and 22 yards respectively. James Lofton is the first NFL player to record 14,000 yards receiving, was the second one game after Drew Hill to score a touchdown in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Lofton caught 764 receptions for 14,004 receiving yards, including 75 touchdowns. Number 31, I had in this on my list of underrated receivers, Mark Clayton. He was an underrated receiver in the annals of the NFL. He may have been a product of playing with a quarterback, Dan Marino, but Clayton caught the majority of passes from Dan Marino, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro receiver. For 10 years, Clayton played for the Miami Dolphins, where his impact was made. During the 1984 season, Mark Clayton caught 18 touchdown catches, which was a single-season record at the time. He is one of only 3 players in the history of the NFL who has caught a touchdown pass from both Dan Marino and Brett Favre. The Clayton to Marino tandem was the most prolific in NFL history. He is in the NFL top in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, including 582 receptions for 8,974 receiving yards, including 84 touchdowns. At number 30, Mark Duper. He was half of the Marx brothers, along with Mark Clayton. Miami Dolphins was a team where Duper earned a nickname called Super Duper for 11 seasons. 3-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time All-Pro selection. His best season was in 1984. We had 71 catches, 1,306 yards, and 8 touchdowns. In 1986, when he caught 67 catches, 1,313 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Duper had 4 1,000-yard receiving yards seasons, including 511 receptions for 8,869 receiving yards, including 59 touchdowns. Number 29, I have Chris Collinsworth. Now, obviously, he's a great analyst for the NFL football on NBC Sports, but he was a 3-time Pro Bowler as a receiver from the Cincinnati Bengals for 8 seasons. Collinsworth went past 1,000 yards receiving 4 times. He was 6'5". He created mismatches against small cornerbacks, especially in the Super Bowl 16, where he caught 4 passes for 170 yards. He appeared in 2 Super Bowls. Chris Collinsworth caught 417 receptions for 6,698 receiving yards and 36 touchdowns. At number 28, I had Henry Ellard. He was a second-round pick in the NFL draft by Los Angeles Rams. In the NFL, Ellard was known for using his size and jumping ability to get to high passes. Even Deion Sanders and John Madden have mentioned that Ellard is one of the best ever. 11 seasons as a Ram, he went to 3 Pro Bowls. He retired at the time. Ellard held Rams team records for career receptions, receiving yards, 100-yard games, punt return average, and total offense. Overall, Henry Ellard was one of the best receivers during the 80s, including 814 receptions for 13,777 receiving yards and 65 touchdowns. At number 27, another Rams receiver, Willie Flipper Anderson. He played tandem along with Henry Ellard, was Flipper Anderson, who was the first receiver to set the record for most receiving yards in a single game, 336 receiving yards to be exact, yards from scrimmage, including 15 receptions in the 1989 game against the New Orleans Saints. Now, Anderson averaged 22.4 yards per reception. He finished the season with a career high, 1,146 yards and 44 catches. He was known for the 1989 division playoff game, where he made a 30-yard touchdown catch in overtime, 1913 against the Giants. Number 26, Irvin Fryer. Irvin Fryer was the first wide receiver to be drafted first overall in the NFL draft in 1984 by the New England Patriots, a 5-time Pro Bowler, and was prolific with catching 851 passes for 12,785 yards and 84 touchdowns. Irvin Fryer played 255 games, which is the most ever for a New Jersey-born player. That still stands, but 255 games, that's the most for New Jersey-born player. That's what I put in at the time. I put the book together. He has caught touchdown receptions from 19 different passes. First player to record a touchdown reception in 17 consecutive seasons. He's the oldest player to score 4 touchdowns in a single game. I am talking about Kareem Yassini. I'm reading a book from, reading excerpts from my book, The Top 50 Underrated Wide Receivers. It's a book that I self-published. Rashad Mitchell, The Top 50 Underrated NFL Wide Receivers. Top 50 underrated NFL wide receivers. I'm reading excerpts from this book that I self-published years ago. Because I'm not an author of books like I used to be, but I self-published a lot of books back in the day, years ago. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Thank you. So that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah. Okay. Like I was saying, Urban Fryer, lastly, second most receiving yards in a half with 211 in the second half of the game. Okay, number 25, I got Willie Gault. Willie Gault had world-class speed on the football field for 11 years, whether it was with the Bears and the Raiders. Gault was the prototypical speed merchant, meaning his greatest asset was his ability to be swift in a pure fashion. During the Chicago Bears 1985 season, Willie Gault caught 33 passes for 704 yards, including a game against the Minnesota Vikings where he caught 6 passes for 146 yards, including a 70-yard touchdown, a one-time Super Bowl champion in Super Bowl 20. Willie Gault caught 4 passes for 129 receiving yards. He played 11 seasons by catching 333 receptions for 6,635 yards and 44 touchdowns. Number 24, Hayward Jeffries. He was part of the great run and shoot offense as a receiver for the Houston Oilers from 1987 to 1995. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler. Jeffries was one of the premier receivers in the AFC when he led the conference in receptions with 100 receptions in 1991. A 2-time All-Pro selection alongside 535 receptions for 6,334 receiving yards, including 50 touchdowns. Number 23, I had Drew Hill. Another receiver from the run and shoot of the Houston Oilers was Drew Hill. September 30th, 1990, Drew Hill became the first player to score a touchdown in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. A 2-time Pro Bowl who became the first player to have 1,000 yards after the age of 30. Overall, Drew Hill caught 634 passes for 9,834 receiving yards, including 60 touchdowns. Number 22, I had Tony Hill. He played alongside the tandem with Drew Pearson. Tony Hill was Alvin Harper before Alvin Harper in terms of wearing the jersey number 80. But that jersey, Hill was a productive receiver in his own right, a 3-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl 12. Tony Hill was known for his quick speed and ability to make big plays. Even coach Tom Landry called Hill a home run hitter because of his big play prowess. Alongside Drew Pearson, this tandem became the first tandem in Cowboys history to record 1,000-yard receiving seasons in the same season. His best season was in 1985 when he caught 74 passes for 1,100 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns, resulting in becoming one of the top wide receivers in the NFL from 1978 to 1985, earning the nickname Thrill and Dial 80. Overall, Hill caught 479 receptions for 7,988 receiving yards, including 51 touchdowns. At number 21, Paul Warfield. He was a receiver who was known for speed, fluid moves, grace, jumping ability, and the hands. He made his mark as a receiver from Cleveland Browns and Miami Dolphins from 1964 to 1974, where he was an 8-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Overall, NFL All-Decade Team of the 1970s, including 427 receptions for receiving yards of 8,565, 85 touchdowns. He was a Pro Bowl Hall of Fame inductee in 1983. At number 20, Charlie Taylor. Before Art Monk, there was Charlie Taylor, who was the great receiver for the Washington Redskins from 1964 to 1977, an 8-time Pro Bowler and the NFL Rookie of the Year in 1964. Taylor was on an All-Decade Team for the 60s, a Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee in 1984. He was a big wide receiver in the 1960s. In the 1970s at 6'3", he was the first rookie in 20 years to finish in the NFL's top 10 in both rushing and receiving. 53 receptions were a record for running backs at that time. He was a successful running back, was switched to wide receiver in 1966, leading the NFL both in 1966 and 1967. He would play the rest of his career and had a record-tying 7 seasons with 50 or more receptions. On December 21st, 1975, Charlie Taylor became the NFL's all-time receptions leader with his 634th career catch in the season finale against the Philadelphia Eagles. 649 receptions for 9,110 yards receiving, 79 touchdown receptions, 11 rushing touchdowns, reaching a total of 90 touchdowns. At number 19, I had Elroy Hirsch. Elroy Hirsch was the NFL's first full-time flanker and one of the first to sport the molded plastic helmet that is the industry standard today. His standout season was in 1951. As a Los Angeles Ram, he was a record setter with a record at the time of 1,495 receiving yards that stood for 19 years, along with 66 catches, 17 touchdowns in 12 games. Elroy Hirsch had 387 receptions for 7,029 receiving yards, including 60 touchdowns. At number 18, I got Stanley Morgan. Stanley Morgan was arguably the true great wide receiver to come out of the Tennessee Volunteers. Drafted in 1977 NFL draft, Stanley Morgan was one of the fastest receivers in the NFL early in his career, averaging 20 yards per reception in his first 6 seasons, with a career high 24.1 yards per reception in 1978. He led the NFL in yards per reception in 1979, 1980, 1981. Morgan had 1,000 receiving yards 3 times, a 4-time Pro Bowler, and his first best season was when he caught 84 passes for 1,491 yards and 10 touchdowns. Overall, Stanley Morgan had 557 receptions for 10,716 yards and 72 touchdowns. At number 17, John Taylor. John Taylor was known for the game-winning touchdown for the San Francisco 49ers against the Cincinnati Bengals in Super Bowl 23. Taylor was a great yards after catch receiver when he was a San Francisco 49er, a Delaware State graduate who was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in 1986 as a third-round pick. During his tenure as a 49er, Taylor was a 2-time Pro Bowler, 3-time Super Bowl champion. What made Taylor great was his play as a receiver and punt returner. In 1988, Taylor led the league in punt return yards with 556, including Super Bowl records of 45 yards, which was the longest punt return at the time. Most punt return yards, 56, highest punt return average 18.7. The game that stands out in John Taylor's career was on a Monday night football game in 1989 against the Los Angeles Rams, where he scored touchdowns on two receptions of 90 yards, 92 and 96, which was an NFL first. Overall, John Taylor caught 347 receptions for 5,589 receiving yards and 43 touchdowns. Even ESPN ranked John Taylor as the 25th greatest NFL draft steal of all time. At number 16, Sterling Sharpe. I had Sterling Sharpe at number 16 as an underrated receiver. He was great for the Green Bay Packers. During the late 80s and early 90s, Sharpe was one of the elite receivers. If it wasn't for the neck injury, maybe the career of Sterling Sharpe would have been limping. A 5-time Pro Bowler who led the NFL in reception for 3 seasons. He led the NFL in receiving touchdowns for 2 seasons. Sharpe became one of only 7 players in NFL history to win the Triple Crown at the receiver position by leading the league in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and receptions, along with being the first player to have consecutive seasons catching more than 100 passes. So in 1994, Sharpe had 18 touchdown receptions, which was the second most to Jerry Rice's 22 in 1987. He had 34 consecutive games with at least 4 receptions, 2 games with at least 4 touchdown receptions, and 4 games with 3 touchdown catches. At number 15, Isaac Bruce. Isaac Bruce was a great receiver for the Great Show on Turf when he was a member of the St. Louis Rams during the 90s. Super Bowl champion, 4-time Pro Bowler. Isaac Bruce may have been the best receiver to play for the Rams. He broke 4 Rams records, including most receiving yards, most receptions, most consecutive 100 receiving yards, receiving games, most 100-yard games. In Super Bowl 34 against the Titans of Tennessee, Bruce caught a 73-yard touchdown pass from quarterback Kurt Warner to give the Rams a 23-16 lead and win. Overall, Isaac Bruce was the second wide receiver in NFL history to achieve more than 15,000 receiving yards. He had 1,024 catches for 15,208 receiving yards, including 91 receiving touchdowns. Number 14, Andre Rison. He was known as Bad Room Rising Spider-Man, but on the field was as good as a receiver as any of his time. Andre Rison was a 5-time Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion. As an Atlanta Falcon, Rison was only the 5th receiver in NFL history to score 60 touchdowns in his first 6 seasons. Andre Rison led the NFL in most receptions in first 5 seasons. Rison was second in the NFL for most receptions in 6 seasons. 743 receptions Rison had for 10,205 yards and 84 touchdowns. Joey Galloway. He was a great underrated wide receiver than given credit for because Galloway was the 8th overall pick in the 1995 NFL Draft. He made an impact as a Seattle Seahawk by setting franchise records at the time for a rookie: 67 receptions, 1,667 receiving yards. From 1997 to 1998, Galloway had 2 consecutive 1,000-yard receiving. Yes, much of a compiler of the number of catches and receiving yards, including touchdowns. Galloway caught 701 passes for 10,950 receiving yards, including 77 receiving touchdowns. Derrick Mason. He was one of the most underrated as a wide receiver from his play as a Tennessee Titan and Baltimore Raven. Number 11 had Donald Maynard. He caught 633 passes for 11,834 yards receiving and 88 touchdowns. Now I'm in my top 10. Harold Jackson. Harold Jackson at number 10 because he's already the most unrecognizable great wide receiver in the history of the NFL. In his second season, Jackson emerged as a star top flight receiver. He had 65 catches for 1,116 receiving yards, including 9 touchdowns. Jackson led the league in receptions in 1972. 1973, Jackson had his best game ever when he caught 7 passes for 238 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Dallas Cowboys. He was a successful receiver as a Philadelphia Eagle, then was traded to New England Patriots, resulting in a dynamic duo alongside Stanley Morgan. They were one of the dynamic duos as a receiving tandem during the late 70s and early 80s. In 1979, Jackson had 1,013 receiving yards, including 7 touchdowns. Jackson had 29 career 100-yard games and 1,000 receiving yards. When he retired, only Don Maynard had more career receiving yards than Jackson. When he retired, only Don Maynard had more career receiving yards than Jackson. For the decade of the 70s, Jackson was first in receptions, 432, yards 7,724, receiving touchdown 61. Despite his great productivity, Jackson was not one of the wide receivers selected to the NFL's All-Decade team for the 70s and not in the Hall of Fame. Overall, 579 receptions, 10,372 yards receiving, and 76 touchdowns. At number 9, Cliff Branch. He was a deep threat speed wide receiver for the Oakland Raiders, where he won 3 Super Bowl rings. A 4-time Pro Bowler during the 1976 season, Branch caught 46 passes for 1,111 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns, averaging 24.2 yards per catch, including 4 consecutive Pro Bowls. In 1974, Branch led the NFL in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. When Cliff Branch retired, he led the NFL in postseason receptions, 73 yards, 1,289 for an average of 17.7 yards per catch, scoring 5 touchdowns. Overall, Branch had 501 receptions for 8,685 receiving yards, including 7 touchdowns. At number 8, Fred Biletnikoff. Fred Biletnikoff was a great receiver, underrated at the time. 6-time Pro Bowler, a Super Bowl champion, including MVP, resulting in a Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee in 1988. He had 40 or more receptions for 10 consecutive years. Fred Biletnikoff had 589 receptions for 8,974 receiving yards, including 76 touchdowns. At number 7, Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith was the greatest wide receiver to ever play for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the amazing thing about Smith's career is that he started his career as a Dallas Cowboy. 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champion. In 1996, Smith emerged as a dominant receiver, finishing with 1,244 receiving yards, which led the AFC in 7 touchdowns. From 1996 to 1999, Jimmy Smith was a key member of the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. In 1999, Smith was part of a team who had the best team in the NFL. Smith had 1,636 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, but his signature game was in 2000 when he had 15 catches for 291 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. But what made the performance more amazing was the performance was against the Baltimore Ravens defense, which is one of the greatest defenses. Overall, Jimmy Smith has Hall of Fame credentials. Look at the numbers: 862 receptions for 12,286 receiving yards and 69 touchdowns. That's the main amazing thing about Jimmy Smith, to put up that many numbers against that Baltimore Ravens defense led by Ray Lewis in 2000. He caught 15 passes for 291 receiving yards. He almost had 300 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens defense in 2000. Number 6, Bob Hayes. Bob Hayes was the world's fastest human as a wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, 3-time Pro Bowler, a Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys. He was a Hall of Fame inductee in 2009. Bob Hayes was an NFL pioneer due to great speed, forcing the NFL to insert a zone defense and a bump and run so that he can be contained. Hayes' first 2 seasons was the most successful because he led the NFL both times in receiving touchdowns, 12 and 13 touchdowns. Bob Hayes was a multiple offensive threat, especially on punt returns in 1968 when he led the league with 2 touchdowns and 20.8 per return average, with a 90-yarder against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's the only player to win a gold medal or Super Bowl ring. Overall, Bob Hayes caught 371 passes for 7,414 receiving yards, including 71 touchdowns. Hayes still holds records in Cowboys history, whether it's a 20 yards per catch, averaging career touchdowns. I think that's still a record, but at the time when I wrote the book, that's what he held as a record. I don't know if that's been broken yet. So this is how I felt at the time in my research. This is a very old book. Art Monk at number 5. I had Art Monk. He was a great underrated wide receiver for the Redskins in 1984. Monk caught a then NFL record 106 receptions, 1,372 yards. That was career best. He caught 8 or more passes in 6 games, had 5 games 100 yards or more, including catching 10 passes for 200 yards. He was the first Redskins receiver to produce 3 consecutive 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He was also the first Redskins player to catch 70 or more passes in 3 consecutive seasons. Art Monk was a prolific receiver overall, especially setting numerous records like being the first player to record a touchdown reception in 15 consecutive seasons with at least 35 receptions. First player to record over 100 plus receptions in the Super Bowl era. First player to reach 820 receptions in a career. And first player to surpass 900 career receptions. Overall, 940 receptions for 12,721 receiving yards, including 68 touchdowns. Number 4, I got Steve Largent. Steve Largent really gets consideration when you look at the greatest receivers in the NFL history. For 14 years as a wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks, Largent was a great elite wide receiver. A 7-time Pro Bowler, a Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee in 1995, Largent is the all-time leader in receiving yards and receptions and receiving touchdowns. He has 8 1,000-yard receiving. Largent was an NFL record holder when he retired. For example, he held records like most career receptions, receiving yards in a career, most touchdown receptions. Number 3, Lance Alworth. You can make a case that Lance Alworth invented the yards after catch because Alworth was known as Bambi because his slender build, speed, grace, and leaping ability. The best wide receiver to play for San Diego Chargers in the AFL, where he dominated leading the league in receiving yards, receptions 3 times, setting the Chargers record with 83 touchdowns. Lance Alworth still holds the record for most games with 200 plus yards with 5, along with Calvin Johnson. I think that's still a record. I don't know if it has been broken yet, but at the time, he still held that record. Most games with 200 plus yards, 5 alongside Calvin Johnson. Lance Alworth was the quintessential game breaker. He was the fastest player to catch 50 touchdowns and reaching 4,000 yards to 9,000 yards receiving yards. At number 2, Raymond Berry. Raymond Berry was the go-to receiver for quarterback Johnny Unitas for the Baltimore Colts. He led the league in receptions 3 times and known for his great hands and precise pass patterns. A 6-time Pro Bowler, a Pro Football Hall of Fame inductee in 1973, Raymond Berry's best performance of all was in the 1958 NFL Championship game against the New York Giants, where Berry caught 12 passes for 178 receiving yards, including a touchdown. When he retired, Berry had the most receptions in the history of the NFL with 631 receptions for 9,275 yards receiving and 68 touchdowns. And finally, I had the number 1 underrated wide receiver. That was Don Hutson. Don Hutson may be the greatest wide receiver a few people know about because Jerry Rice is heralded and regarded as the greatest receiver to wear a pair of cleats, but he broke most of the records that was already set by Don Hutson. He was the first modern wide receiver who led the league in receiving yards for the Green Bay Packers for 8 years during his 11-year career. Hutson, credited with creating many passing routes, made him a dominant receiver who still holds records such as 8 consecutive seasons leading the league in pass receptions, 5 consecutive seasons leading the league in pass receptions, 7 seasons leading the league in pass receiving yards gained, 9 consecutive seasons leading the league in passing receiving touchdowns, an 8-time All-Pro selection, 8-time All-Pro selection, 4-time Pro Bowler, and a 3-time NFL champion, a 2-time MVP, and the all-time leader in franchise history with 99 touchdowns. He is the epitome of an underrated wide receiver in NFL history. 488 receptions for 7,991 receiving yards and 99 touchdowns. So that's a breakdown of my book that I self-published years ago, the top 50 underrated NFL wide receivers. The top 50 underrated NFL wide receivers. I self-published this book years ago. Hopefully you enjoyed the breakdown, the top 50. That's it for tonight. I won't do another video. I don't think I'm going to do another video. I might save it for another time. So I may start right here. And I do any videos, I want to take it easy the rest of the night. So what I had scheduled, I may reschedule that Broken Cisterns for another time, another date. I'll see what happens, but that's it for the night. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Appreciate it. Until then, have a good night.